Okay, this is a special video out of my regular scheduled program. Uh, right now I'm running the Florida Seminole War Heritage Trail, which I actually have three more segments to play before have to start recording some more, and those are going to play over the next 3 weeks. I didn't want to wait for this one. I just have had to go up north. The memorial service, my brother-in-law passed away, my sister's husband. So I went up to see that. I first stopped in Kentucky where my brother lives, and then we carpooled up to my sister in Wisconsin. So I pretty much crossed from south to north most of the whole country and pretty much saw the rest of 75, Interstate 75. But whenever I travel, I like to visit historical sites that tie into the Florida War. So I'm going to do that. So I have some very interesting sites that I want to tell you about. And let's go on the tour. The first site is in uh, Indiana near Louisville. Okay, this is along the Ohio River, Switzerland County, Indiana, a town called Vivi or spelled like Vevey, where the Kentucky River runs into the Ohio. It's just northeast of Louisville, Kentucky. And so this is Musée de Venoge. They have a YouTube channel, so I'll put that in the description below. This house was restored, reconstructed, originally built, we think about 1828. And so on the YouTube channel, they reenact events from like 1812 to 1839 when the owner, Jacob Weaver, he wrote in his journal about the happenings of the time and his wife, Charlotte. And they were both originally immigrants from the French-speaking part of Switzerland, and many of the Swiss people settled in this county, which is where it's named Switzerland County. And so it's very neat because the reason being is that we mostly see mansions from this time period, and 99% of the people did not live in mansions. They lived in everyday common cottages like this. This is a French style cottage where the family lived down on the bottom floor, and a lot of times they rented the top floor out to another family trying to settle in the area. So it used to have a staircase on the outside of the house that it's now been enclosed, and we're actually going to go up there too. You can see, of course, the barns here, and check out the YouTube channel. They visit by appointment or they have special events during the year. Uh, this county is rich in history. The buildings around town were built from the late 1700s until the late 1890s, so 19th century Victorian era. Of course, the front of the cottage, as I drove up, looking at the side, you can see where the fireplace is that was reconstructed about 30 years ago. They were going to tear down this building and they started to take apart the siding from the wall and noticed that it had brickwork, which seemed very strange. So they started looking into the history and found out it was worth saving. Then the husband and wife who owned it decided to have it restored instead. The roof is shingled by wooden shanks, which is really neat. Here's the back side of the house. You can see the windows on the upper side. Jacob and Charlotte lived on the bottom floor, had their bed and kitchen there, and they had 10 children. Eight of them lived in this house, and they were put on the upper floor or they rented it out. This is going up that staircase I mentioned. It's now enclosed. These are original hand-hewn timbers, and that's original siding and some original brickwork. So very significant. You can, if you get a closer view, you can actually see how this is hand-chopped timbers, original wood siding. And then looking opposite On the other direction, they have this other wall in the attic. This is actually kind of like the wooden slats and chinking between it, which I find very interesting. Uh, this white on the upright pillar, that's actually newspaper from when the building was built in 1828 that survives that they put over it. So that's pretty, and the spinning wheel that's just stored up there. And let's go in the tavern. As seen on the videos, the fireplace, a bartender is there, and the table in all the videos is right here. So that gives you a look of inside the inside of the house. Uh, it's a very small place to film all the videos that they have, so they usually do it at night when there's not a lot of traffic on the highway, which is right next door. Going into Vivi, or actually north of town, used to be Jacksonville. That was the town where Jacob and Charlotte Weaver originally settled. And this is the cemetery. Nothing exists of the town. There's a few farmhouses in the area. Oh, and wait a minute. That white spot on the ground, that's a tombstone of Charlotte there. Her husband Jacob is buried somewhere in here. We don't know where in the cemetery. They looked at some of their graves, but they had other tombstones next to her, so his grave has been lost to time. Back in town, uh, going to the side of the river, this is the Ohio River. You can see straight across is where the Kentucky River flows into the Ohio. Where I'm standing right here, last April, they flooded really bad, is like the sixth highest flood that they ever had. And it's much further down than it looks, but the flood waters pretty much almost came up to where I'm standing uh, to see this picture. Now, if I turn around, it started to rain, so this just looking out the car window. This is a house built about in the 1790s, about 1799, built by a man named George Ash. He was called Indian George. He was originally a white boy that was captured by Shawnee Indians, lived among them for 17 years. Very interesting history. And of course, when he came back to look for his family, he was dressed like the Shawnee, had his ears and nose pierced and jewelry hanging from it, which they didn't recognize who he was. But he built this house, actually handmade bricks, and so it still exists today. There's a local man from, I think, Louisville or something who uses it as like a I don't know, his second home here, who's not there all the time, but it's not open to the public. Of course, you can see they restored and put a more modern roof on it. So that's pretty cool. Um, George Ash, he's buried in a cemetery down the hill. I didn't get to see it because it's on private property. And so that is uh, that is Vivi there. And I'll probably go back in about a year for when they do a living history program at Vinoge. Okay. So that was the common everyday homes. Um, And now I'm going into the mansion with the General Jessup connection. Yeah. So you notice the crazy background behind me? That's wallpaper in the mansion. And let's go see what the mansion looks like. So if you go into Louisville, Kentucky, it's kind of near the center of town, also nearby the river, Ohio River, is a house connected to General Jessup. It's known as Locust Grove. So you see I go visit historic sites with the Florida connection or the Florida War connection. So this is Locust Grove right here. Built about 1796, I believe. Might have been before then. Your typical kind of colonial style house of the late 18th century. And there's kind of a somewhat different angle. That's the kitchen building back there. So this was a house owned by George Rogers Clark, and it was the last house he owned uh, and lived here until he passed away. Does it say? Yeah, he died in 1818. Then it went to his family, the Crones. It's spelled like Krogan, but they pronounce it Crone. Of course, this neat map they had added in the visitor center here of colonial uh, America at the time and Spain on the west side. So this is, uh, this is about during the American, right before the American Revolution. You can see Georgia extending east to the Miss or west to the Mississippi River, and North and South Carolina extending west to the Mississippi River. Uh, it says Kentucky, Cherokees. It said Kentucky was part of Virginia at the time. And of course, you can see up there Illinois. And at the time, Spain possessed what's now the Louisiana Purchase, which when Napoleon took over Spain, he kind of took it back and sold it to the United States. And so this is a quilt they have in the visitor center, kind of explaining who they were. General George Rogers Clark, uh, and I think his wife Lucy, I think, or anyway, when Clark died, that it went to his wife's family, Major William Crone, and his wife Lucy, and they had several children. One of them, Anne Heron Crone, married General Thomas Sidney Jessup there, and she actually passed away before Jessup. What's what's interesting, another character in the family I'll talk about was when Jessup was Army quartermaster, uh, uh, Anne's brother, George Crone, was Army Inspector General. And you could say here he died in 1849. More about him in a minute. So, of course, Anne Heron Crone married Thomas Sidney Jessup. So, anyway, in the back, they have a cemetery. George Rogers Clark, he's not buried here. His grave was moved to another cemetery in downtown Louisville. So, this is the remaining tombstone. And more about cemeteries in a minute. And so, Clark, of course, he is a surveyor, surveyor's chain going through the house. It's a real neat tour. Of course, surveying and mapping tools. That's for Dr. Joe Knish. And of course, William Crone, his wife, Lucy, here by the server. Uh, and they have recreated wallpaper. The wallpaper is what I thought was kind of spectacular. Dining room and service, of course. And so this is Ann Jessup or Ann Heron Crone Jessup. And Jessup, this is a painting here. So we've seen plenty of pictures of Thomas Jessup, so we're not going to see that right now, but they actually found this on eBay about 20, 25 years ago, back when eBay had really good stuff. So the historic site bought it and restored it and put it back here. So it's, not often that we get not only the officers of the Seminole War, but we get paintings of their wives. This is her brother, George Crone, Army Inspector General. Now, George was a notorious alcoholic, and he had won a battle during the War of 1812, I think Fort Stevenson, and that put him in the good graces for the rest of his life. But his journal has been republished, and it's hilarious. He says things like the Irish should be prevented from enlisting in the army, which is kind of silly because his grandfather immigrated from Ireland. And this is his wife here. Because of his intemperance, they eventually divorced, and she started a home for orphans and widows. I'm thinking Louisville here, or might have been when they moved to New Orleans. George moved to New Orleans, tried to start a business down there and failed. And of course, this is William Clark and later in life. This is the last bedroom of William Clark. Uh, there's a bed on the back. He had a 15-year-old servant that helped him around. Uh, the boy who was a slave actually helped him kind of the rest of his life until he passed away. Of course, Clark's table. Now, what's interesting, this wallpaper that I have back behind me, this was the original wallpaper that they had on the room. So when they were restoring the mansion, they actually recreated the wallpaper design, which I think's really cool. Of course, here's another guest room. The curtains on the window are same as the draperies on this uh, canopy bed, which is quite something. It's actually a beautiful pattern on that too. It's a style of the times. And then the children's room, this is the doll play furniture. Of course, that's a light right there. This is a doll's bed, and it's even such that they have a miniature bedpan that goes with the doll set. Uh, hold on. What happened here? Oh, well. So I'm not sure why my pictures are going crazy. This like the second time it's happened to me, so I'll just leave it at that. So right down the road is the tomb of Zachary Taylor. So our next stop. So this mansion and the Zachary Taylor house and tomb are almost within walking distance. They're like a mile apart. So let's go over to the nearby, the house of Zachary Taylor. So down the road, there's this historical marker for Zachary Taylor's home. It was the home he lived here as a boy, um, and his brothers and family. And you turn down here, and of course, right in the front lawn is a historical marker. I just had to do a drive-by. That's the house right there. Because it's owned by a doctor who doesn't like people visiting, and so you can't really stop and see it. So, if he doesn't like people visiting, why does he own a residence that's owned by a former president? So, that's what it looks like, not open to visitors, but it's a really neat style house. And of course, down the road is the National Cemetery for Zachary Taylor National Cemetery. And of course, you can see Zachary Taylor's tomb and monument. The Taylor family actually has their family cemetery in the back in the middle here, and on either side is the National Cemetery. You see the VA tombstones. Okay, going closer, of course, you have the Zachary Taylor Monument, Taylor on top. There's an emblem of him. Major General Zachary Taylor, 12th President of the United States, born in 1784, died in 1850. And on the sides of the monument, it has his battles that he participated in, including Okeechobee. And of course, on the back, so you have the pretty neat carving So this is the tomb with Zachary Taylor and his wife Margaret going up to it. Of course, Zachary Taylor and pressing my cell phone to the glass so I could see his tomb. That's Taylor on the left and uh, General Taylor on the left, his wife Margaret on the right. And you can probably see Zachary Taylor, birth and death dates, and then Margaret Smith, his wife. Now, what's neat is if you walk behind it, you see this mound. This was actually Taylor's first tomb before the more substantial presidential one was built. Kind of interesting, burying the white man in the mound. That's actually the front. Of course, I don't think anybody's buried in there now, but you can visit. It's a historic site, even though it's not where he's buried right now. Plaque above. And of course, the Taylor family, William Jewett, Lieutenant Colonel, he was also an officer that served in Florida. I believe he was at, there was a Fort Jewett, or um, it was near Wakulla Springs, I believe. So this is another Seminole War connection. As somebody who married into the Taylor family. And of course, a monument to Richard Taylor, which I think was, let's see, okay, that's Zachary Taylor's father there. And of course, Major Joseph Walker Taylor, and of course, in the Civil War, no doubt. And that's it for now. So, when you go on vacation, you can look for places that are definitely connected to Seminole War history, which is something I always look for. So I hope you enjoyed this interesting tour of sites that connected to Major General Thomas Jessup and Major General Zachary Taylor, who were both commanding officers during the Florida War. And that's it for now.